We recording.
Okay.
So, when you're finally done with a piece, let me ask a different question, then I'll come back to that one. On average, how long does it take you to finish a piece?
That depends largely on the scale. And typically I kind of take some kind of notation on how long I'm spending on art. But when I do that, I'm not taking into account the original sketching. I don't draw things. Usually, it's very rare that I take a piece of paper and I draw it, and then I continue and I continue and I continue and I'm done and I put it in a frame. Usually I draw something over and over and over and over again until I get to a point where, I'm like, this is what I want. These are the proportions that I want. And then I go on and I decide this is going to be the final draft.
Okay.
Then I take into account, once I have that final draft, from the start time to the end time, 50 hours, 100 hours, 500 hours, because some of the pieces, I have a piece that was about 500 hours. I've had a piece that was 4 hours. That's a really broad spectrum answer. But that's really what it amounts to. Am I drawing something this big that doesn't take a lot of detail and time? Sometimes I get lucky. Sometimes my hand is just doing exactly what I need it to, and it lays out into the paper perfectly. It takes less time than I anticipate. But looking at some of these pieces, I think the average on the pieces here today, 30 hours, 50 hours, small pieces. There are a couple here that are 100.
So, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay committed to these projects when they, start to balloon to these long, hours?
Well, it all starts with an obsession. I get an idea in my head, and I fantasize and dream about it, think on it, and I add and subtract until I'm ready to put pencil to paper. There are times where I have to take a break, and sometimes I'll spend months without getting back to the table. And that is problematic, honestly. That's what I mean about not enough time in the day. If I could regularly commit a couple hours, things would get produced faster, but then I wouldn't get all the other things that are important to my heart and in my life done. So I'm sacrificing my passion for love for my passion for community and others. And it's hard because art, you're doing those same things. If you're giving back to your community like this in some way, shape, or means sort of is, if you're an artist and you like to look at art, or if you're not, but you enjoy being a part of art or an artistic community, being able to have an outlet to see those things is important. Staying busy, constantly producing, takes a lot of discipline and sacrifice. Although I do not always lack the discipline, sometimes I'm just not willing to sacrifice time with my friends and family so that I can. You have to be a little selfish. If you're going to spend the rest of your life only doing the things that you want to do, and for instance, mine would be art. I'd miss out on so much else.
You mentioned finding that balance, and trading passions. I find that really interesting. Could you elaborate on that? How do you find that balance?
Man, honestly, and I'm still figuring that out because sometimes you'll do, your end goal should always be to be what's best for yourself and everyone in your life, in your immediate life at the very least. Excuse me. Everyone else, yourself and your immediate family, your friends that are closest with you. But on that same token, the people that love you are going to be understanding that there are some times that you have to take time away from an event or sitting down to watch a movie because you have to produce, you have to create what's calling to your heart. I'm still figuring that all out and experimenting. I think it'll get easier in time, but this is all becoming more of a reality the further things go on. And there are some people that are full-time artists and full-time businessmen and women. That takes up the majority of their days. They're making that sacrifice. Maybe that's how they provide for their family. But they're also missing out on baseball games, birthday parties. Not all the time, but sometimes. What's more important? And, there is no right or wrong answer. But you have to find that out for yourself. And I'm still working on that.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. It's really good. Thank you. Everything looking good so far.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, this is like the only second time I've done this format before, so I'm a little bit nervous. That's why I check the recording, make sure it's working.
Sure.
Because I don't want
to do all this and then, wasn't even turned on.
Oh, that would kill me so much.
It would be pretty funny.
It would be funny. And then I would have to do a podcast, only using the audio. That would be hard. I guess speaking on that note, what's your biggest goof, trying to make artwork that
I've got one.
Okay.
Maybe not the biggest, but definitely the one that comes to mind. I started a drawing. It was this one. The First King. It's like 6.5 feet wide and like 4 feet tall. 6, 3.5, whatever. I wanted to dye the paper.
Okay.
So I wanted to somehow color the paper, but only half of the paper. Now, first off, when you're using paper that large, you have to buy it by the ream, or you have to buy whole sheets. And they deliver one sheet and 2 pieces of cardboard. It's not easy, especially if it's a windy day. I give it to the UPS guys because, and some of those reams of paper can weigh 50, 100 pounds. It's not easy. That said, I ordered this French paper from a company that's been around almost 200 years. Each sheet is, I think I figured it out to be like $184. Now, this was an experiment. I knew what I wanted. I had it all planned out in my head. Just because you got the idea in your brain doesn't mean that it's going to work out. And it cost me 3 sheets of that 180 whatever dollar paper. The first time, I laid the paper out, I tacked it down, and I wet it. And to spread this ink that I made with tattoo ink, watered down tattoo ink, I needed to stain the paper, not allow it to spread. So I'm like, sponge will do it. I can hold the little bit of ink and I can brush it out, and then I'll sponge the rest with just water. There are different kinds of synthetic sponges, and then there's real sponges. Well, the synthetic sponge held all the pigment because this pigment's got sediment in it. If this is your white sheet of paper, when I put this blue on it, the ink laid right on it. It was beautiful. I was like, this is great. And as soon as I pulled the sponge across it, it was gone. It kept disappearing. Like, what the hell is going on? So I did it again. Same thing happened. The sponge was the wrong kind of sponge. And by the end of it, the pulp of the paper was coming up. The water had been on it too long, too heavy, and I had been rubbing it right off. That was the first one. The second time, I did the same thing with a different sponge. This sponge allowed the pigment to stay, but it fell apart.
Oh.
It just started disintegrating, and it was creating little rough marks, because as it was crumbling, there'd be new rougher spots. So it was putting gouges in the paper. After that, I was like, I'm done. This just isn't going to work. $180, $200, whatever it was, and it takes a couple weeks to get to you. So what should have been like a 48-hour thing turned into 3 months waiting in between shipping and delivery. The third sheet came. I thought it all out. I made enough of the diluted dye, the ink. I just left it in a bowl and I capped it. And this time, I just tilted the whole table and I poured the ink halfway up, and I took a truly synthetic sponge and I just whipped it right down. So I was like raking off extra water. I had another one. I dropped the table, leaned it up the other way, straight water down the other side. And I just dropped the table and I let it sit. And it took 24 hours. And there was like this lightning bolt down the middle. Blue, jet white. Worked. It worked. The paper, the other thing too is it's terrifying to wet paper that large. Mm. Because it's doing this once it's wet. When you tack it, those waves just stretch. And then you're left with a glass flat piece of paper. I was so happy. But that was the goof. And it was an expensive one.
So, is there an artist that you look up to?
Yeah, I guess I got a couple. I've always been fascinated by Michelangelo, but I mean, who isn't? One of the greatest painters and sculptors of all time. I have two other names that come to mind. Lori Lipton. Lori Lipton is a pencil artist. She looks like one of your buddy's moms, one of the kids that you grew up with, just a good old gal. And her pencil renderings are phenomenal, kind of dark. It's very odd. to imagine that this little lady is drawing the things that she draws, but it's what calls to her. And they're so packed with detail, so wild. I'm drawn to them. There's another, and this fella, I came across one of his books. It was almost like it was a book full of his drawings and discussions on how he created them. J.D. Hilberry, incredible. Some of the best, he mixes graphite and charcoal. And what he ends up with are truly breathtaking, ultra realism drawings. His subject matter is well thought out, great still lifes, but what he draws, his level of accuracy is brilliant. It's just otherworldly. He's so good.
So, what are your thoughts on the growth of AI artwork programs?
Well, I mean, remember, art is subjective, so there's not really good or bad art. You know how we all feel about something is based on our life and our experiences, and what I like, you might not like. The only thing that my only critique, I guess, would be I see a growing trend towards saturating the art market with work that is being produced without mastering a skill, without chasing down and trying to learn the same way everyone before us did. For instance, there's this professor that I know who teaches at JCC, and he's a painting instructor. He teaches his students to take an image and project it onto the wall and then trace it. Now, that's not necessarily AI, but the same principle applies. What I mean by that is you're taking away the years and years that people study how to hold their brush, to leave a certain brush stroke, to make a certain effect, or the fact that you have to map things out. You have to learn to get proportions correctly. And that comes from years of struggling and failing. I think that there's something to be said about artists that are doing things the traditional way, which is not to say that they're better or worse, but to know that an artist has struggled through something to master a talent or a craft. I give that person, I applaud them, versus somebody who puts a picture into a program and the program creates this finished product for them. It seems like a shortcut. And I think that years from now, when we look at art, I think people will notice that. We'll be able to see when they're looking at a picture, painting, a photograph. That doesn't look real. That doesn't look right. Because you can sometimes tell when something's been photoshopped, for instance. There's just something about it that stands out. And when a machine or a program is creating a brushstroke, There's just something missing when you look at an actual hand-painted, handcrafted canvas piece versus the AI-produced canvas piece. There's just something lacking there. Again, it's not good or bad. It's all subjective, And then what do? Do we get to a point where this show is only for AI, and this show is only for hand drawn or hand done? Then you've created two different art worlds. You've segregated the artwork, and there's enough separation in the world. We don't need more of that.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So, in my experience, the people that are often using that type of tech, they see it as a way of, granted, this is all through the lens of Twitter, so that puts a little bit of bias there.
Right.
But a lot of them see it as a way of getting one over on the artist, because it's a skill that they just simply can't learn, and it's I'm an artist too. Look, as you said, it was like a shortcut almost. And here we go. I don't need to spend all those years when the program has already trained and learned, through someone else's, efforts, struggles, and difficult, experiences. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts, or what would you tell those people, people that are oh, I don't know how to do art, you guys just seem to, pull it out of your minds, say, project it onto a wall. I can't do that. I use this program to do that instead.
Well, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I bet you if you gave me a computer program that could figure out all the mathematics that a rocket scientist actually needs, I could probably show you how to launch a rocket. That doesn't mean that I understand it. And I think that understanding not just a media, the different kinds of canvas, the different kinds of paper, they all have an impact on how your final product comes out. If you're using a program for all of that, what knowledge do you have? There's something also to be said about failure. And sometimes the best way to learn is from struggle. No struggle, no progress. You have to fail to, not that you can't appreciate a piece of art or whatever it is that you do in your life if there isn't struggle, but to really understand how something works comes from not a computer program. The computer knows what it's doing because it's been taught to know. Well, that's how learning is in general. You have to be taught to know how to do that. So if you're not going to teach yourself, what have you really learned?
It's a really good way of putting it. I never thought of it in that way, because I have actually used those programs myself out of curiosity. What if I made, or what if it's Starry Night, but instead of Starry Day? Simple changes like that I found intriguing. Then I looked at it further, and how a lot of those programs are just used off of stuff pulled from the internet, without asking the individual, the person who created it, hey, can we use your work to train this machine? Just because it's public, I'm just gonna take it.
Well, see, that's, do you really appreciate art? If you really appreciate art, then you probably appreciate an artist and the struggle that they've gone to make this particular piece of art. But if your end game is to just recreate and mass produce, you're diluting originality. you're taking it away from people that are continually struggling. And that's not to say that these programs don't take some struggle and there's a learning curve. No doubt. I just, you can't take art away from people, so I can't say that it's a bad thing. Or rather, you shouldn't take art away from people. There are individuals that maybe can't paint, but they could do something else. But a program allows them an outlet to be creative. And for the soul, for your heart, that's a good thing. To be able to be creative. And maybe one of these programs allows you to do those things, to experience a level of creativity that you could otherwise not do or have. I'm all for that. But to take something from someone else without tipping your hat to them, you know, Van Gogh's Starry Night, what a masterpiece. And why wouldn't you want to give credit where credit is due? And furthermore, who created the program? I mean, are you going to tip your hat to that person? I think you should. If they've given you this incredible ability to do things that you otherwise can't, I think you owe it to them. But that's humility, and that's a totally different subject. Being able to just say thank you to somebody, and sometimes that's hard, especially if you don't know who that person is. And maybe they wouldn't want you to do it. Would Van Gogh want you to redo it and make Starry Day? Maybe he wouldn't. But I doubt that. Most artists are not going to tell you no. You see it differently, that's just the way art is. It's the way the world is.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I'm going to pivot a little bit, but still on the topic of like that kind of like desire to create, but without that direct means to, you know, do so. Something I thought was interesting is they allow a lot of those people that use those programs, they feel like they don't have the knack that say you do, you know, that drive to, you know, work on a piece for 500 hours. And it's like, because I don't have that, you know, that little switch in your head that's been flipped, I can't be an artist. And I want to get your opinion on that.
I don't think there's an I can't switch in your brain. I think there's an I won't. You know, there's a tendency to allow an excuse to fester into some. It's real easy to say that you can't do something and then just not do it. Allow that to be the reason that you're not going to strive after it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be an astronaut. Not smart enough. Well, if you work hard enough, maybe. I think that it's part just a willingness to give up before you've even started. And that's a self-defeating mentality. It's not productive. You know, a shortcut is a shortcut because if it was easy, if it wasn't hard, it would just be the way. You know, it being a shortcut doesn't mean that it's easier. I think that somewhere along your journey, you have to decide for yourself what is worth working hard for, mastering. And that comes from within. Like, to be a master of something, anything. Dedication, determination, and lots of discipline. And it could be anything. To making it the excuse that you don't have the ability or the time. I think that's a terrible limitation to give yourself. And why would you want to do that? It's a self-defeating mentality. I think that it's probably better to be more encouraging. Uh, I don't want to call it a scapegoat, but that makes it a lot easier to just say, well, I couldn't really be an artist, but I can do this program, so now I'm an artist. Versus taking the time, spending countless hours reading, watching others, spending money, failing. Failure isn't comfortable for everybody, but it is a necessity of sorts. Even if you don't view yourself as an artist, you can become an artist. You might not be a pencil artist, but you could be a cake decorator, or you could teach yourself how to sew. You could teach yourself how to sculpt sand. And they're all forms of art. I can't play the guitar now. But if I spent 6 months driven, I can learn to play the guitar. I think anybody can. Just I choose not to. And if there's a program out there, hey bud, you want to learn to play the guitar? Push this button. Oh yeah, that sounds great. You did that. You're a guitar master. Isn't that really easy? You know? And who knows? Maybe you're still making really creative tunes and people like them and love them. Well, then who cares? But it takes failure and time to get good at anything. I think that using programs like that, how do you truly appreciate what you're producing? Do you love it the same way as somebody who spends 500 hours painting whatever? I mean, if you can do something in 3 hours, are you going to love it as much as the person who spent 500 hours producing the same thing, sweating over it, hard knuckle, hungry some nights, not sleeping others? I just cracked this out. I put it in this program. I don't know. I hope that answered your question. I don't know if it did or not.
It did.
Okay.
It did. One more question, and then we'll wrap things up. So, actually, I suppose, never mind. Anyway, my question is, what, for people that are like, kind of like on that, they're like, oh, maybe I want to use this program, like, I don't think I can dedicate the time, the hundreds of hours to, become a pro, but I still want to create. What would you tell them? Yeah. As someone who's kind of self-taught yourself.
I mean, stay true to who you are, first and foremost. But I will say that not all shortcuts in life have good end results. If you want to be a master of one thing ever in your life, whatever it is, I think that it's worth struggling for. One day you're going to have, your life will be your legacy. And what you leave behind to the rest of the world, I don't know, maybe it'll be an AI program piece of artwork. Maybe not, but I haven't seen any yet, so I don't know. And I'm not a fortune teller, so who knows what museums and galleries will have in them in 100 years. But I think that for the sake of learning, which in and of itself is a beautiful thing, why not just do it like everyone else? Struggle through it. Take the time and dedication. Anything worth doing is worth doing well and right the first time. If you're doing a program and you have, we'll talk about it from an art perspective. Let's say that you're using this program to create pieces of artwork and you make a bunch of them and you have a show and everyone's, rah, 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 fantastic, love it. Then one day somebody comes along and says, draw me an apple. Can you draw me an apple? I'm your biggest fan. And then you're like, oh, well, I can't draw an apple. I don't actually know how to draw. I have a program that does it. I don't know. This doesn't feel the same way for me. And maybe that's because I've taken the time to teach myself and learn, and I'm constantly learning. And you will for the rest of your life. But why not give yourself a hobby, something to do in your spare time? Because that's what it can be. You can be a master of something and it still be your hobby. Something that you enjoy doing. Then it doesn't feel like a failure no matter what. Because you're enjoying that journey. And isn't that what it's about after all anyways? It's the journey. That's what it's all about.